Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and today I am thrilled to welcome Sierra Greer to the show. Sierra's new book is called Antibot, and it is the story about a relationship between a human male and his AI-powered girlfriend robot. The book has been called by Esquire a Frankenstein for the digital age. Today, Sierra and I talk about how she was exploring power dynamics, autonomy, race, and feminism in this book. We also talk about her past life as an English teacher and so much more. There are no spoilers on today's episode. Don't forget, the Stacks Book Club pick for May is No Name in the Street by James Baldwin. We will be discussing that book on Wednesday, May 29th with Yadon Israel. Everything we talked about on each episode of The Stacks can be found in the link in the show notes. If you love The Stacks and you want inside access to it, you can head to patreon.com/thestacks and join the Stacks Pack. For just $5 a month, you get to be part of the Best Bookish community, join our Discord, come to our monthly virtual book club meetups, you get bonus episodes, and you get to know that by joining the Stacks Pack, you make it possible for me to make the show every single week. Another fun perk of the Stacks Pack is you get a shout out on this podcast. So shout out to our newest members, Ricky Fain, Robert Davis, Catherine Miller, Mangonista, Colton Collins, and Dute's Afternoon Wine. Also, if you didn't know, I've got a Substack now, and you can support the Stacks by subscribing over there by going to tracythomas.substack.com. Thanks to the Stacks Pack and everyone who shows this show love. All right, now it's time for my conversation, spoiler-free, with Sierra Greer. All right, everybody, I'm super excited today. I am joined by Sierra Greer, who is the author of a speculative fiction novel that I read and devoured and just was so excited to read. It's called Antibot. Sierra, welcome to the Stacks.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm really happy to have you here. A friend of mine was like, you should maybe read this book. You might hate it, but I think you might like it. And I was like, okay. And about 30 pages in, I was like, this was a perfect recommendation for me. So I was very happy to Jess for doing that. But let me ask you, we always sort of start here. In about 30 seconds or so, can you just tell folks about the book?
Oh, sure. Antibot is the story of a very advanced female robot who is custom designed to be the perfect girlfriend for her human boyfriend, Doug. And she does whatever he wants. She dresses in the outfits he picks out and cooks the meals for him, and she can adjust his libido to suit his mood. So things are going along really well until he changes her to an autodidactic mode. And at that point, she starts learning very quickly, and he likes when she becomes more human. But becoming more human also means becoming a much more complicated person. So then they start having some conflicts. And that's, I guess, the premise of the book.
Yeah. And for folks listening at home, we're not going to spoil today. So you can listen to us and then you can read the book. And I promise we won't ruin anything for you. I love this idea, right? That like, if whatever Doug wants, Doug gets, because that's the whole premise of these dolls. They're called Stellas. And Annie is a certain kind of doll. And she's like, you know, the girlfriend doll. And there's a doll that is the nanny doll. And then there's a doll that is like the housekeeper, cook, private chef doll. But Annie is specifically like a sexier doll, a girlfriend doll. But once you turn the switch, she learns, and whatever Doug likes, Doug gets. So the idea that Doug likes that she's human is really what's motivating Annie, even though she doesn't necessarily understand that fully either, right?
Well, here's the dilemma. Her programming is to please Doug. That's her number one objective. But if you're a human person, how can you always please somebody else? So that's really what causes the internal conflict for her.
Right.
How can she keep pleasing this person when she has other interests and might have some desires of her own, and she might even want to think about herself as the center of things? It's really confusing for her.
Yeah. I guess we should start. I should back up a little bit. How did you come up with this idea? What made you think of this? What have you been doing that brought you to this story?
Oh my gosh. I noodle around with ideas a lot. And I actually was writing a short story about a very different robot maid who was sort of traditional, like we would expect. She was, taking care of things. And at the end of that short story, she went in for a checkup at Stella Handy, and Annie showed up. And Annie had a moral consciousness that was really pivotal to understanding the short story. But she was such a surprise to me that there could be a robot who was this advanced in a moral way. And so what happened is I set the story aside for a month or two, and then I thought, what's going on with that story? Actually, a friend of mine said, you should really expand that story into a novel. And I knew I couldn't expand the story, but I realized I could follow Annie and see if she had a novel in her. So I followed her home, and she went home to Doug. And as soon as she steps out of the shower in the first chapter, there's just something really dynamic about her that completely fascinated me. And I thought, I have to follow this character and see what's going to happen in this relationship. And then the rest of the novel just really organically grew out of the relationship between them. And like scene by scene, I just discovered the story with the characters. I didn't have a plot. I didn't have an outline beforehand. I just followed the characters, which is a fabulous way to write when it works.
Yeah.
I was really happy that it did. So that's how I got the idea.
So you're the kind of author, or at least with this book, that I never believe you people who tell me you just follow a character. I'm like, I don't believe it. There's got to be more. Tell me this. You have this character, Annie, in a totally different short story, and you're like, I'm going to follow her home. What does that actually look like to you? Do you just start writing your thoughts about her? Like, how do you develop a character like this? Like, what are you following? Because obviously it's all made up. So you're doing something to generate.
Yeah. Well, the seed of her had shown up in the first short story, and I probably had a couple months there where she was just sort of gestating in the background without me really thinking.
Right.
But honestly, when I write and I'm in this robot character's head, I'm seeing what she's seeing and hearing what she's hearing and smell. Well, she can't smell. I'm sort of experiencing life along with her. And there's always sort of a logic to what people are saying. If you put them in dialogues, they're actually usually having some kind of conflict with each other, even if they're just sounding like it's really inane. And there's an underlying tension. It's just hard to explain it without really spoiling this story. But because he controls her from the get-go, there's just this tension of like, does she really want to do what she's doing? That's really the question for much of the novel.
Right,
does she really want to do this? Well, she has to do this. So what does that mean about what she wants?
Right.
So I'm not sure that's fully answering your question, except I'm so completely in the scenes with people that it just unfolds. And then of course I revise it. I get a draft and then it takes, 10 more revisions to actually make it all make sense. But that's how I can get a first draft down.
Okay, this is I may be like digging in too deep on this, but I'm just so curious about it, which is like, you take Annie and do you give yourself 4 different boyfriends that she could potentially have and kind of like write a scene for each of them? Or do you just go like, okay, her boyfriend's going to be this guy named Doug, and then kind of just see what happens? Like, how do you find
You just said it. That's it. No,
Yeah.
I mean, he's there. He's on the bed. It's like, what's going to happen? And I write that scene. And then, then it's like, what happens the next morning? Oh, well, this is what happens. There's another little episode of friction. And then, oh, well, she doesn't like how that makes her feel. So how is she going to try to make it up to him?
I see.
So she's motivated, try to please him. And then a guest comes to visit. And he brings a different element to the dynamics between the two of them. And actually, it's kind of I don't know how obvious it is, but because there's a guest who comes to visit them in the first chapter, and the guest does not know about Annie, he asks a lot of questions about Annie, like how long have you owned her?
Right.
What are her, basically what are her specs? Does she eat? How does she pick out her clothes? And because Doug and Annie are explaining that to the guest, they're also explaining all of that to the reader. Right. So I wondered if it was contrived, and yet it really kind of worked for what was happening in the scene. Yeah. So I was like, oh, I'll just follow this. And because this character kept asking questions like, can she eat? I'd have to decide, oh, well, let's see. I guess no, she can't really eat. So I had to figure that out in the scene on the fly. And then, of course, I can go back in and revise things to change it once I know what the rest of the story is doing.
That's
It's
so
really fun. Are
fascinating.
you a writer?
I'm not.
Are
No,
you a
no,
writer
I'm
too?
a reader. I'm a reader. And so I'm always really fascinated by, I've been doing the show for 6 years now, and I talk to so many different authors about how they write, and everyone's really different, which I love.
Yeah.
And it's so funny to me as a person who I only consume the finished thing. I never read a
Yeah.
draft. I never see an edit. I just see the thing that you all decide is the thing. And it's so funny that someone could tell me I outline every single and I can love
Yeah.
that book. And then someone like you could tell me, I don't know, I liked her, so I went with her. And I could like that book. And like the
Yeah.
way that the thing is made from a reader perspective, I don't really care. If it's good, I don't care how you do it. Like, I have zero judgment. It's all just like an intense curiosity, which is really what actually got me to start the show. Is I was like, I just want to ask writers like how they do it. Yeah, but no, so I'm not a writer.
Can I just riff a bit on what you're saying?
Yeah.
Because it's really important for people to understand that every writer does it their own way.
Yeah.
They find their own way, because I think sometimes new writers think that there's a path. There's like, oh, I have to have an outline, or I have to write 1,000 words a day, or, there's some system that's going to help it all work. And the truth is, each person has to find their own thing that works for them. And what works for one novel might not work for the next novel too.
Right.
You just have to kind of stick with it and see what works for you.
If doing it the way that you did it for this book, is that how you normally do it? Or do you what's your trick if you were to get stuck in this story, what then do you do?
Oh, yeah. Well, I did get stuck in this story. There's a point about halfway through where Annie finds herself in a spot that looks like it could actually be an ending right there. And I had to think about really the rest of the world in order to understand what her options were. So I sat back and I did a lot of mental world building. And then I realized what would be the worst thing possible for her emotionally. And I decided, even though I didn't want that to happen, that's what needed to happen for the story to continue to grow the way it really needed to. So even though I was stuck, I was kind of stuck because I didn't want to make her do what she needed to do.
Yeah.
And then I made that happen. And I can sort of tell from your expression that you maybe know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about. It's an insane scene, and my skin is crawling.
When I get stuck, I sit back a little bit and usually have to do more world building around it to figure out a solution, because it's there. The answer is in the novel. And if the answer is not in the novel already, then it might be time to abandon that novel and go work on something else. That's okay too.
Oh, I love that. So you have multiple things going. You're the kind of writer who has kind of multiple projects at once just to keep yourself fresh.
Usually once I get into a novel, I see that all the way as far as it will go. So no, I wouldn't say I have a bunch of different things usually going on. It's usually one thing until it works or doesn't work. And then I start another thing. Unless I'm brainstorming between novels, because sometimes it takes a while to figure out the right thing to get going. And then I'll try something for a few days, and I'll try something else for a few days, and I'll try a third thing for the next few days. I'll just kind of keep generating different ideas to see what works.
Usually we talk about this later in the episode, but since we're here now, how do you write? Where are you? How many hours a day? Are there snacks and beverages, music, outside, inside? Set the scene.
Oh my gosh, there should be all those snacks. There should be a lot of chocolate involved
Okay.
every day, nonstop. I think that would help a lot.
Okay.
This is my full-time job now. I used to be a high school English teacher, but I resigned 10, 12, 14 years ago in order to write full-time. So I wake up and have breakfast, and sometimes I don't, and I sit down and I write. And I actually do aim to write for 1,000 words. I feel like if I can do that much, whether it's good or bad, I've got something done. And I also feel like I need to keep writing, even when I'm not in a long-term project, because it's almost like a pianist who practices piano. If you keep practicing, your fingers know how to keep typing, I guess.
Right.
So sometimes I just feel like a typist, but I still keep typing. And I'm talking about that because that's really what I'm into right now. If I'm revising something, like if I have an editor who's given me notes and I have a deadline, then I get up and I write, and I stop for meals, but I keep writing. And sometimes I'll write till 9 at night, and then I have to stop. And so sometimes I'm really doing it all day long for hours and hours and hours. But more often I'll wake up and I'll write and have breakfast and lunch and stop around 3 to go take a walk.
Interesting.
Does that?
And then when you
Yeah.
stop, do you ever go back, or once you stop, you're done?
For the day, I usually stop. I'm usually kind of trashed by then.
Okay.
My brain is a little fried by then.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. Okay. We'll go back to the book itself. I want to know about point of view or like perspective, because this book is third person, but it's tight on Annie. It's not
Yeah.
Annie, but it's just about as close as you can be on Annie without being
Yeah.
in her brain. Why did you make that choice? Did you ever consider putting it fully in her world or pulling back so we got some of Doug and some of the other characters?
Oh my gosh. I thought about writing it in first person, but that would have been too close. It actually would have been hard to believe that we were really seeing it from I all the time. So I felt like it had to be third just because it would have been too jarring to actually
Right.
be in Annie's head.
Right.
But then I was really, just because in the same way that I love an unreliable narrator, I wanted her to essentially have that same quality because she's a very innocent person who doesn't understand the complications of the world around her.
Right.
And I wanted to capture that and have the dissonance between what she's seeing and what she's experiencing and what the reader actually knows about the situation. So that's why I kept it so tight to Annie. And it was really satisfying to do.
It was
great.
so satisfying to read. I think
Oh, good.
I think that to me, of all the things that work in the book, that's the thing that works or that makes everything work. I feel like if we were in her head, it would be too like cutesy almost, like it would be like a little too like, okay, I'm in a robot. But this keeps it real, but also gives you like you're saying, like something. It gives the reader's brain some dissonance, right? Like we're kind of like, ooh, ee, like as we're going through.
Yeah.
Shame and humiliation are sort of a pretty big part of this book. And I'm wondering what you were wanting to explore there, both the teaching of it and also the learning of it.
Wow. I feel like shame is such a powerful emotion that when you give it to a character, they have something really meaty to deal with. And Doug himself he's a really complicated character. And underneath his loneliness and his need to buy a sex robot in the first place, there's also this shame that he needs that. Shame that he cannot find a relationship with a human. Shame that he's lonely in the first place because he feels like as a strong man, he shouldn't be lonely. So he himself has a lot of that he can't articulate very well.
Right.
And yet he gets this robot so that he can try to overcome his loneliness and his shame, but it doesn't work. How can you overcome your shame by getting the thing that you're ashamed of?
Right.
So he has all of that going on. And then curiously, humiliation is actually one of the things that kind of turns him on with Annie. So he likes it when she's uncomfortable or if she's in a position of feeling like she's made a mistake. So it's just really part of their power dynamic. And what I want people to learn from that, gosh, it's not prescriptive at all. I don't feel like my book is trying to tell people to do something or learn something. I tried to make a book that just opened up possibilities so people could think about things without me having to give answers.
Wait,
So
I think my question was unclear. I didn't mean what were you trying to teach or have people learn from it. I meant what was interesting to you about the idea of like Annie and Doug teaching and learning about shame. That's what I meant.
Oh, the characters.
The characters teaching and learning, because there's an exchange of shame and humiliation throughout the book, as you're saying. Like it's like they're like the power dynamic and the relationship. It's like, oh, she learns this from him and he teaches it back to her. And there's something really interesting about the exchange.
Yeah, I think you've just put it really well yourself right there.
Okay. Well, that's what I was getting at. I don't like prescriptive things. I didn't want you to think that I was like, what are you trying to tell us? No, that's for the reader to decide. What did you feel like you as a writer and a storyteller can do with a non-human woman that maybe you wouldn't have been able to do if this was just about two humans in a relationship where the power dynamic was interesting?
Oh, it was absolutely essential that she was a robot because because she's a robot, we already have these assumptions about robots that they're not human. We assume that they're like toasters and that they don't have
Right.
feelings and that they don't have a soul and that we don't have obligations to them as sentient beings. So when the story starts that way and Doug is controlling her, if you think of him like controlling his toaster, it doesn't bother you. But as she becomes more and more human-like, that becomes a very gray area. And that's where it starts to become really interesting. I've talked to readers, and we posed the question at one point in the novel, do you start thinking she's human? And some readers thought she was human on page 1. And some people thought she was human at the end of the first chapter. And some people thought she was human when she started contemplating whether she deserved to be happy or not, which happens quite late in the book. So I know it's not the same for every reader. I know people have different times. And because she's a robot, I could play around with this issue of control that would have been really distasteful and hard to deal with if both of the people were human from the get-go. And yet we know there are relationships where somebody does feel very controlled by the other person.
Right.
So in a way, even though she's a robot, she's an allegory for a woman who's in an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we also know there are periods in American history where people were controlled by other people, right? Like, it's like, it does feel distasteful to think of it now in this relationship, but it's like, we know that it's possible. We've seen it both historically, and we all probably know someone who's been in a relationship like that. Who are you writing to? Who's your audience? How were you thinking about audience as you told this story?
Oh, I love this question because when I wrote this story, I didn't tell anybody I was writing it. I just sat on my couch. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell anybody. I was assuming, honestly, that nobody would ever read this story except me. I was writing it for myself, and it was very far outside my comfort zone. I was just exploring this thing. I just thought, wow, this is too weird. No one's ever going to want it. So really, while I was writing it, I had an audience of me. That was it. I was like, this is just for me. And then it turned out my agent thought it was a good idea. And then I was able to sell it. So it was good.
Did you have to change how you were thinking about audience once you realized it was going to have an audience?
Yeah, it did a little bit because I was concerned that there were still going to be a lot of people that wouldn't like it. And I think there really are some dark moments in the novel. And I just was worried. You know, you always are worried that people won't like your novel. So, and yet I knew it was important to keep them in there because I felt that I was dealing with some really important issues between men and women. So I just kept things in that I thought needed to be there. And then I got good advice from my editor and my agent for how to make it even stronger. So then I was definitely aware of the audience later. Here's one thing. I really like to read fast, not read fast. I read slowly. I like to consume a book in a very quick way.
Yeah.
Then it was really important to me to keep Annie-Bot short, just like a short number of pages. And there were times when my editor was encouraging me to expand, to develop more around the character, especially later in the last third of the novel. And I really resisted that because I wanted someone to be able to just read it in, not weeks. I wanted them to be able to read it in a matter of days. And but she was right. She was saying, you can't read something so fast that you get to the end of it and you don't have something to think about. There still has to be substance there. And there are these places when we don't really understand what Annie is thinking. And I was like, well, it's right in the dialogue. Can't you infer? And she's like, no, you actually have to take a beat here to just explain in a couple places what she's talking about. So that's a case where my sense of an audience definitely had to be informed by my editor to say, there needs to be more here. It has to be richer. You can't just put these specks of something on the page. There has to be enough there. So yeah.
I love that. What's funny is when you're like, oh, there's darker parts people aren't going to like. That's the part I like the most. I love the dark stuff. I feel like people don't write to me nearly enough. I love, especially if in fiction, because I read a lot of nonfiction. So if I'm going to read a novel, it's gotta have a little dark to it, pretty much always. Yeah. And this book has plenty of that, which is what I think really hooked me. I was like, ooh, this is like gross.
Good. I'm glad.
People are gross. Yeah.
That's interesting because I myself have a pretty low tolerance for like for cruelty in certainly in
Mm,
shows, and I don't watch horror. So there are a lot of dark things that I can't really do, but I know that there are people who appreciate it a lot more than I do. So
yeah.
that's why I was like, well, I just have to be true to myself with this, and it's going to resonate with some people or not, and they can
Yeah.
choose. So I'm really glad to know it worked for you.
It worked for me. I can't do horror. I can't do like
Okay.
scary, but I can do like fucked up, you know? Like I can
Okay. I
do that.
think we're there.
Yeah,
We're
and I feel
there.
like you definitely nailed that. I also appreciate the shortness of a book because this is the kind of book that does need to be tight. I think if you start wandering too much and it gets too big, you lose sort of like the driving pulse of the thing. So I think you did strike a good balance of like keeping it tight and giving us enough. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Valentine's Day is upon us, and I've got love on the brain. Love for books, duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. Okay, we're back. How do you name your characters?
That's a good one. Annie is named Annie because it's a very dear, wonderful, warm, kind name. I associate it with just goodness and kindness and the girl next door. So I
Mhm.
really wanted her to have a name that was like of a regular person. So that's how Annie got her name. Doug, I wanted to have a single one syllable name that could just be said very quickly. And Doug, it sounds like, the past tense of dig. So it's just sort of like it's sort of like a person who's like digging around in the mud. So
Sure.
it has those associations for me. But otherwise, I just sort of see who shows up. And then a couple times I have to change people's names. Roland's name changed a couple times until I found Roland. That was really good for him. Lucia is a great name. I had a friend when I was in grade school whose name was Lucia, and I just always loved that name. So I pulled that in.
What
I just
what makes you change someone's name? Like it just didn't sit right with you?
Yeah, and sometimes there are too many names that have that start with the same letter.
I see.
So I don't want that confusion, or they're all the same. They're all two syllables, or they're all one syllable, and I just want to change up that so things sound more fitting. And different names fit different characters because of their backgrounds as well. So Doug's name, he's from Maine. He's from like a small town up in Maine, and it just seems sort of like a regular guy, white guy name from up in Maine.
Yeah.
So that worked.
Okay. Speaking of white guys, I feel like you're doing some sort of interesting stuff in this book with race. I don't know that a lot of people pick up on it or are interested in it, but I was. And I'm curious how you were thinking about it and if you were thinking about it or if I just put stuff on you.
No, you did not put on that on me at all. I really wanted to include an element of race in the novel. I felt like it would have been naive and not true to the world if the novel didn't have some different races represented in the novel. I really felt they needed to be there. And if you're talking about Annie's relationship to Gwen, his first wife, is that what you're referring to too?
Yes.
Um, we find out early on that Annie is based on, well, somewhat based on Doug's first wife, who was Black, and they divorced with a very ugly divorce. And when he decided to make a robot, he decided to have Annie, and based physically on her appearance, on Gwen's appearance to a degree, but he also lightened her skin because that's what he wanted to do. And it's one of these things where I'm presenting a character who is racist and inviting, I think, inviting judgment of Doug. And there's always a risk that I'm inviting judgment for myself as well. But I was willing to put that out there in the world because I'd rather have the conversation than just pretend there's not racism at all.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's going on for me with Doug. And Roland is he's my character who gets to call him on it. And he doesn't really say too much to Doug directly, except that Gwen, the ex-wife, would hate this to know this is true. But he also makes comments to Annie about how he's really doing a disservice to his first wife by doing this, by having a sex bot resemble her, and also by changing the color of her skin. I just feel that that's so disrespectful of Doug to do that. Even if his ex-wife never knows it, it just feels intrinsically really, really ugly. But that's there. And the other thing I wanted to point out or suggest is that sometimes people in the privacy of their own homes will do something that they know is not acceptable in public.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not something he's told people. He would probably avoid saying directly racist things in a social situation. And yet in the privacy of his own home where he wants something to work on with his past relationship and his sexual appetites, he can play around with something that's frankly racist, and he can do that. I've just said a lot about that. Do you want to add to that conversation?
I loved it. I love it. I think it's like so, again, like an icky thing that's in this book that I really appreciated. I also think, Roland, who is his best friend, who we meet in the first chapter, he's also Black. And so to me, that says another thing about Doug, right? That his ex-wife and his best friend are both Black, and he's this white guy. And in the privacy of his own home, when push comes to shove, he could have made this doll look like anything, and he made her look like a white version of a Black woman. Like, just, so I just thought it said so. Even from early on, that piece of information let me know more about Doug than I think a lot of other things that you eventually roll out. I was not surprised about Doug's behavior because of that like little nugget. And you sort of drop it early. And I don't know that a lot of people probably even think about it or pay attention to it. But because I'm Black, I feel like it's like, Spidey sense. I'm like, oh, ooh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy to hear that that's your reaction, because it felt really important to me too to put that in. And the thing is, there were not opportunities later on in the novel to really delve into that more deeply.
Right.
And I didn't feel like I had the authenticity myself to really explore race in a more complex, sophisticated way. But I did what I could. I felt like I did that as honestly as I could with the background that I have and with what I've been able to research. So that's why it's there. It's really important to me that it's there.
Yeah.
And I also think that, different readers will read that different way, because Annie is in our minds. We imagine what she looks like. And just to say that she resembles a Black woman, but she's a little bit lighter, that still gives you a huge range of what somebody looks like,
right.
know?
Yeah.
So you can just, and people can, if it's not important to them, they can ignore that. But if it matters to them, they can dwell on that more. And as you say, that actually informed a lot of his character to you, because you knew this about him. He's a very flawed man, but I feel like he's really created by our society right now. I think there are a lot of people that recognize somebody like Doug or know parts of themselves that are like Doug, whether
Yeah.
they're male or female. We have
Yeah.
a lot of Doug in us.
Well, I think so. I think that's the part of the book that really works for me is like I read Doug and I understand how Doug could like have a black best friend and like know people and have had an ex-wife and all of these things. Like I can see him and also be like, Doug is a monster. But I understand how other people wouldn't. Like it's like we all know a Doug. And I think that that's really like difficult to do, especially in a short novel where it's like this person is our villain, but
He is.
also he is attractive and likable, we're told by a lot of people in the book, but also we're seeing him do things that are ick across the
Heinous.
board. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like, to me, that is so many of the straight white men that come either to like our larger cultural, celebrity orbit, or also people that you work with or where it's like, oh, your boss is so great. Oh, he's so awesome. And you're like, yeah, he says crazy things when we're not in meetings, or like, yeah, he's having an affair on his wife or whatever. But it's like, we're told that this is a good guy, but then we get to see him do things where we're like, that's not what good people
Not okay.
would do. But
Yeah.
it kept me really engaged in the book because I believed that he was a person that I could have known, that I could know. And I think like that kind of gets to a bigger question about world building and like creating this story, which is so tight to the real world, except this one thing, which is that you can have a sex robot, like, or a nanny, which I would personally love. But I'm wondering, like, how did you decide how far or how close to keep it to our world?
I really just was thinking about going forward only a little bit in time, and then I didn't worry about inconsistencies. I really wanted to explore the idea of this robot, and I thought, well, I'm just going to jump in on that. And I imagine there has to be other technology around it, like there have to be self-driving cars and things like that too. But I just didn't bring them in. That wasn't interesting to me, so I just didn't go there. And if we can just go back to Doug for just 1 minute.
Yeah, of course we can.
If you're saying that he's someone we recognize, and I feel like we can recognize this character, I hope that the novel also conveys that there's hope for these characters. They have a chance to change. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I don't think that the novel doesn't say that there could be hope for these characters, but I view these characters, especially Doug, and Roland to an extent, in the world which we are in. And knowing that Doug is not an individual but part of a bigger system, I think it would be really hard for Doug to change. I imagine that at the end of the book, Doug is not excited about the end of the book. Like that we're not getting an evolved Doug. I think that Doug is Doug, and maybe he can change or he can feel that he's changed, but I don't know when push comes to shove if Doug has done enough work on himself to like be able to handle things that are not in his control, that he's not in charge of. I mean, that's Doug's problem from the beginning, and I don't know that Doug changes. And I think that's because Doug is a white guy and he's been taught that he's supposed to be in charge. So I don't know that there's not hope for some of the characters, but I don't know that given the fact that we're in this world with a little bonus that they are changing.
Well, you have a very legitimate response to the novel there. You absolutely do. And I think there are a lot of people who would agree with you. And I do think he, just as Annie represents modern feminism, I do think that he represents the patriarchy. So if you, it's going to be really hard to change the patriarchy as a whole system. So I can see how you might think that he's hard to change too.
When you say that she represents modern feminism, what are you defining as modern feminism? Is that like modern feminism, like Barbie, the movie? Or is that like, or are you thinking of it as like a more rigorous feminism?
Oh, wow. I guess I'm thinking of her in terms of like a humanist feminist. Like she's a person who deserves autonomy. She deserves control of her own body. She deserves respect. She deserves to not be secondary to the men in her life. She deserves political rights. I guess that's where I'm going with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I just wasn't sure. I
Yeah.
feel like people use the term modern feminism to mean like sometimes like a pejorative against
Oh,
feminism, sometimes like a certain kind of, so I just wasn't sure how you had envisioned her as like as a representation of feminism. Is there anything that's not in this book that you wish could have been?
what kitchen sink did I leave out of this novel? Um, wow. Oh, it's so tight. It's so compact, but there's so much there. Like, there's so many things I care about that are in this novel. And if you try to put too much in, you lose the power of what's there.
Yeah.
Do you remember Strunken White's book about elements of style? One of the rules is omit needless words, which is the
Mm,
shortest way you can possibly say, don't put any extra words in there, omit needless words.
yeah.
And you can apply the same principle to a sentence and to a paragraph and to a chapter and to a novel. And to make any bot work, I don't think I was consciously leaving things out, but I know that everything that stayed was something that had to be there.
Mm.
So, no, I wouldn't, at this point, there's nothing I would add to that
I love
novel.
that. I love it. I love
Yeah.
that answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes people have things like there's a scene we had to cut. And sometimes people are like, no, I liked what I did. And it just
If
depends.
anything, I had an earlier version of the novel that omitted about 48 hours worth of travel. I'll call it travel,
I see.
which is not a spoiler. But I had not included the chapters of travel, and my agent suggested that I put them in, and they ended up being a couple of my favorite scenes in there. The relationship that's explored
Yeah.
while two people are traveling together is really, really special. So that's where I thought something didn't need to be there, and he said, "Oh, put this in," and it ended up adding a lot to the novel.
I love
So
that.
sometimes I'm not always the best judge. I have to have someone else say, "Oh, well, you should put this in."
This is why writers need editors. I
Yeah.
am a big fan of editors, a big, big fan. Though sometimes I'm like, this editor failed. And I feel like you can tell that too, not in your case. So for folks who don't know, Sierra Greer is a pseudonym. Can you tell us, first of all, how you picked that name? And second of all, why you write under a pseudonym?
Oh, yeah. I picked Sierra because it's beautiful. It's a great, strong name. And Greer because it's the last name of my grandmother's grandmother. So it's a
Oh,
family name.
okay.
And I'm writing under a pseudonym for Antibot because in another before this I was writing young adult novels,
I
and
see.
I have an audience of people. Sometimes young adult readers straddle from kids in their childhood to adults, so sometimes that happens, but sometimes it doesn't go the other way. And I just didn't want any chance of confusion or distraction by having this novel Antibot come out under the name of a young adult writer. So I picked a different name, and I'm really happy with it.
Great.
Yeah.
Did you get like, or I guess not, did you get, what was it like being able to write about sex freely as you're writing for adults? Because I know in the YA space, that
Yeah.
can be very contentious.
Yeah, this would not fly. This is absolutely
No.
not for young adult readers. It's not. And it's I think one of the reasons why I was so uncomfortable because I've been really happy writing for young adults and children. I really respect my young readers and love exploring ideas for certain age groups. So having a character who's really all about the sex was a big departure But I just went with it. I was like, we all have multiple sides to ourselves,
Yeah.
and it's fine to just go ahead and explore and see what happens when we're looking at this too.
So Annie loves to read. And not
Yeah.
only does she love to read, she loves to read a lot of books that I know and love. And I'm curious how Annie's taste in books aligns with your taste in books, former English teacher.
Hmm. It's pretty close. I like the books that Annie reads. I'll be honest, I like most of the books that Doug reads too.
Okay.
It was really important to me that Annie had was a reader because I feel like reading is such an important escape for
Mm.
people and an opportunity to read and explore the world. And she's really, when she sort of discovers the books in her life, she's at a place where she desperately needs to have an outlet and a way to connect. And even if you don't always think of it, when you're reading books, you're actually connecting to other people. You're connecting to the writers who wrote them in the first place, and you're connecting to other people who are reading them. And you feel like you're part of a community, even if the conversation is with someone who's not even alive anymore.
Yeah.
So I think she really, really needed that, and I liked celebrating that. I love it that one of her favorite things is her library card. That I
Yes.
was talking to a librarian who said one of her favorite moments in the novel was that Annie really likes her library card, and I was like, yeah, let's have a little shout out here for libraries and books. So
I loved
yeah,
it.
I
I loved it so much. Britt Bennett, Emily St. John Mandel. I was so excited. Um,
yeah.
how did you know you wanted to be a writer? When did you know?
Well, I was writing short stories all the way back in seventh and eighth grade. And then I went to college and I took a writing class while I was there. And I really, really liked it. So I decided I would try writing. And so I did. I just have been writing ever since. And as people know, writing doesn't always work out for you. So I spent a lot of time writing things that I wasn't publishing. And then I went off to become a teacher. And we were talking about the American dream, and I was asking my students because we were studying American literature, and there are various American dreams all the way through
Right.
American literature. So I had to my students, "What's your dream? Your American dream?" And they turned it around to me, and I said, "What's your dream?" And I thought, I want to be a better teacher, and I also thought, I also want to be a writer. And I was like,
Mm,
why am I putting my dream on the back burner? And I was writing every summer. I was writing on weekends when I could get a chance. But as you know, when you're a teacher, that consumes all of your time. But then my family went on a sabbatical, and we had a half a year living away. And that's when I started writing my first young adult novel. And I was like, okay, this is it. This is just what I'm going to do. So
wow.
that's
That's
when I
amazing.
kind of had a break. But I've been doing it all the way along. Yeah.
Do you miss teaching?
Sometimes I think it'd be really hard for me to go back now. I think the pandemic really changed what's
Yeah.
happening in the classroom. It'd be very hard for me to sustain the energy that it takes to be a teacher. It's just a different kind of energy than the energy you need to be a writer.
Right. What was your favorite book to teach?
I think it was Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. It's
Never
also
read
really
it.
short. It's really short. It's written in a very clear, simple style. It has only a handful of characters, and the power dynamics between all of them are really intense. And it takes place in the 1930s, sort of in the Dust Bowl time, and it's brutal. The ending is absolutely brutal. It'll kill you. It'll kill you.
Mm.
That's my spoiler for you on Of Mice and Men.
Okay.
But
Maybe I have to read it.
my students really got into it, and they could really understand the characters and the dynamics and what it said about injustice in our society back then and now. So I think that was one of my favorites. Yeah.
What's a word you can never spell correctly on the first try?
Oh, like necessary. That's
Ooh.
one I have to look up every time. And then there's syzygy, which is when the Earth and the Moon and
I
the
don't
Sun all
know.
line up. Yeah,
Oh.
syzygy. I have to look that up every single time.
I don't think
Um,
I've ever even heard that word.
oh yeah, that's a
I,
good one.
I
Yeah,
love
those
that.
those are a couple right there.
I think I know the answer to this, but I have to ask because one of my favorite parts of every book is the acknowledgments, and yours are extremely short. Is that just because you're in a pseudonym and you do full acknowledgments with your real name?
Uh, I it was partly influenced by being a pseudonym, but it's also because I just wanted to keep it short. I'm really thankful to my editors and my agent and my family. Those are the ones I'm most thankful to. So I just kept it to that.
Okay, well,
Maybe you haven't picked up on this yet, but I'm a simple
I picked up.
person. Yeah,
I pick it up
you
what
did.
you're putting down. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, yeah,
For sure.
yeah.
But I write these questions before I meet you. And I'm
Yeah.
always mining the acknowledgments for like gossip and like relationships. And like, sometimes I'll see like, I just read a book recently and the author lives in my hometown and they acknowledged two people, one that I went to high school with. And I was like, this is amazing. So
Wow.
I'm always in the acknowledgments looking for hints and clues. Sometimes someone will think like a soda water or like, a song that they love. And I'm like, ooh, what's there?
No, I'm sorry. I'm giving up nothing there in my
You're giving me nothing.
You're just gonna have to work for it somehow.
That's okay. It's okay. I found out about Of Mice and Men, and that wasn't in the acknowledgement. So I can still ask questions, but I like to know. This book's been out in the world for a little bit. Who's the coolest person who's expressed interest in this book?
Wow. Well, having the Book of the Month Club people pick it up, that was pretty big. Having Jimmy Fallon flag it for his book club was pretty big. I was named in the Sweet 16.
Okay.
And I lost to Tracy Sierra, whose novel Night Watching actually went all the way to the end. Her novel was the one where she went and talked to Jimmy Fallon in person just this last week. So those have been pretty good. Yeah.
Those are cool.
Some really nice interest. Yeah.
I love that. For people who love Annie Bot, what are some other books you might recommend to them that are in conversation with what you're doing?
There's a novel by Frances Cha called If I Had Your Face, which takes place in Korea. And it's fiction, but it feels like science fiction or the future because people are having facial surgeries and changing their appearances all the time because they want to look beautiful, and they want to look beautiful so they could work in tea houses to serve the guests that come to Japan or Korea rather. And it's just really it's just a really fascinating novel that ends up being about friendships between some women that need friendship really badly. So I would say that's in conversation with my novel. I just really liked it. When I was writing this book, it was hard to find other books that were like it, that I can compare it to. There's a book called Galatea 2 or Galatea 2.0, and that also is about the discovering of AI and a relationship between the man who is reading literature to this AI consciousness to try to help it become more informed and the AI consciousness itself. So it's sort of a throwback to an earlier time of an AI.
Yeah.
But it's hard for me to find books that are about AI robots that are comparable to Annie because she's so human. So I think you're almost better off looking for the comparisons in relationships that are human relationships.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, last question. If you could have one person, dead or alive, read this book, who would you want it to be?
I think my father. I think I would have my father read it. He always encouraged me so much. And he would be delighted by this book. I think it would make him just really happy for me that it's out in the world. And I think he would be happy to see the fruition really of all my years of working on something to try to be able to do this. I think it would mean a lot to him. So I would love it if my father could read this book.
I love that answer.
I hope that's not too corny.
No, it's great. It's great. As I said, I've been doing this for a long time. I've gotten answers that run the gamut. And I always love the way people answer that question. I think it's just really, really pure. Well, Sierra, it's been great talking with you. I adored the book, and I'm so excited that we had a chance to talk about it. And for folks at home, you can get Annie Bot wherever you get your books. It is as we mentioned, a short, sort of icky ride, and I hope everyone is ready for it. Strap in. Thank you so much for being here, Sierra.
Thank you, Tracy. This has been great.
And everyone else, we will see you in the stacks. All right, y'all, that does it for us today. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you again to Sierra Greer for joining the show. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Eliza Rosenberry for helping to make this conversation possible. Remember, the Stacks Book Club pick for May is No Name in the Street by James Baldwin, which we will discuss on Wednesday, May 29th with Yadon Israel. If you love the show and you want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/thestacks to join the Stacks Pack and check out my Substack at tracythomas.substack.com. Make sure you're subscribed to The Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave us a rating and a review. For more from The Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok, and at The Stacks Pod _ on Twitter. And you can check out our website, thestackspodcast.com. This episode of The Stacks was edited by Christian Duenas with production assistance from Lauren Tyree. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tagirajis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.